After I took my grandson fishing, my daughter-in-law told me never to take him again, saying, "He came home smelling like you, old, tired, and stuck in the past." My son said, "Let's respect her wishes." I quietly returned the tackle box to the garage, but underneath it was a letter my son had written as a teen, and when she read what he once promised me. "Please don't take him fishing again." I heard those words and felt something inside my chest go very still, the way a clock stops when the battery dies. Claire was standing in my doorway holding Noah's little backpack between two fingers, dangling it like she'd found it in a dumpster. The boy was right behind her, still wearing his life jacket, still grinning the way only a 9-year-old can grin after catching his first decent bass. His hair was windswept and his sneakers were muddy, and he looked more alive than I'd seen him look in months. And she was standing there with that expression I'd come to know too well, the one that said everything around her was somehow beneath her. "He came home smelling like you," she said. Her voice was calm and precise, the way she always talked, like every word had been scheduled in advance. "Old, tired, and stuck in the past." My fingers tightened around the tackle box handle. I felt the metal edge dig into my palm, and I was grateful for the pain because it gave me something to focus on besides the humiliation climbing up the back of my neck. I'm Harold Bennett, 68 years old, retired mechanic. My hands are rough from decades of grease and engine work, and I've got a bad knee that aches when it rains, and I talk to my dead wife in the garage when the house gets too quiet. I am not a perfect man. I've got a flaw that has caused me trouble my whole life, and that flaw is a long, detailed, unforgiving memory. I remember everything, every slight, every promise, every moment when someone chose convenience over kindness. I hold things quietly and I hold them for a long time, and that habit has kept me from healing in ways I probably should have healed years ago. But it also means I notice what other people prefer to pretend never happened. That evening on the porch, I noticed everything. Noah opened his mouth. "Mom, we caught this really big." "Inside now." The boy's smile fell off his face like something knocked it loose. He looked at me with those big brown eyes, the ones that looked just like Ethan's eyes when Ethan was small, and then he disappeared into the house without another word. The door swallowed him up, and I was left standing on my own porch with Claire's verdict still hanging in the October air. Ethan finally stepped forward. He'd been standing slightly behind her the whole time, which told me everything I needed to know about the shape of things. He rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't look at me. "Dad," he said quietly, "let's just respect her wishes." That hurt worse than anything Claire had said. Claire was my daughter-in-law. She owed me nothing except basic decency, and she clearly had a different definition of decency than I did. But Ethan was my son. I worked double shifts at the shop for 3 years after his mother died so he could stay in his school and keep his same friends and not have to feel any more uprooted than he already felt. I'd driven him to every single baseball practice for 4 years without missing one. I'd learned to make his mother's chicken soup from a handwritten recipe card so he could have something familiar on cold nights. And now he was standing behind his wife, rubbing his neck, asking me to respect her wishes. "Of course," I said, my voice came out flat. I nodded once and walked back to my truck. I drove home alone with the untouched sandwiches still sitting in the cooler on the passenger seat. Turkey on white bread, cut diagonal the way Noah had told me he liked it. I'd made them that morning before sunrise carefully, the way I used to make Ethan's lunches when he was small. I drove the whole 40 minutes home without turning on the radio, and when I pulled into my driveway I just sat there in the dark for a while, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. I carried the cooler inside. I put the sandwiches in the refrigerator. I washed the tackle box. I did everything slowly and carefully because slow, careful movements kept the other thing from happening, the thing where the grief and the anger and the loneliness all crowd into the same room at once and there isn't enough space for any of it. Then I went to put the tackle box back on the garage shelf, and a different box slid loose behind it and landed on the concrete floor with a hollow thud. I almost left it there. I almost just kicked it aside and went back inside to sit in my armchair and watch the news until I fell asleep the way I usually did. But something made me pick it up, some instinct that I couldn't have named. Inside the box was a folded piece of notebook paper, the kind with the blue lines and the red margin, the kind they used in schools when Ethan was a teenager. The handwriting was his, young Ethan's handwriting before it got tight and efficient the way adult handwriting gets. This was loose and slanted and full of the kind of sincerity that teenagers don't know is rare yet. My hands were shaking by the time I finished unfolding it. "Dad, when I'm older, I swear you'll never feel alone. I'll make sure my kids know who saved us. I'll make sure they know about the fishing trips and the sandwiches and the way you never complained even when things were hard. I don't know if I tell you enough, but I think about it all the time. If I ever become too proud to sit beside you in a boat, I hope I remember the kind of man you were before it's too late." I sat down on the concrete floor, not on purpose. My legs just stopped working and I ended up sitting there with the letter in my hands and the garage light buzzing overhead and my late wife's old gardening gloves still hanging on the hook by the door where they'd been for 11 years because I couldn't bring myself to move them. I sat there for a long time. The next evening Ethan called. His voice was light, the careful kind of light that means someone has been coached on how to handle a conversation. "Hey Dad, listen, Claire's having some colleagues over for dinner Saturday night. She wanted to know if you could drop off some of the old family photos. She thought it would be nice to have some out for guests." I thought about that for a moment. "Sure," I said, "I can do that." "Great, thanks Dad, that's really helpful." I packed the photos carefully the way I always did everything. I wrapped them in tissue paper and laid them flat in a shallow box so they wouldn't bend. And then I looked at the letter on the kitchen table where I'd left it, and something stirred in that part of me that remembers everything, and I picked it up. And I slipped it between two of the photos near the bottom of the box where it would be easy to miss but not impossible to find. I told myself it was just returning something that belonged to the family. I told myself it was an accident waiting to happen and I was just helping it along. But that long, dark flaw of mine knew exactly what I was doing and it didn't feel sorry about it, not even a little. The dinner party was everything I expected and nothing I could have prepared myself for emotionally. Claire's house smelled like expensive candles, and whatever she'd cooked that came from a recipe website instead of a person's memory. There were people in good shoes standing around holding wine glasses and saying things about quarterly projections and school enrollment rates and real estate values in neighborhoods I'd never been to. The table had a centerpiece that probably cost more than my grocery bill for a month. I delivered the photo box just as the guests were settling in, and Claire pointed me toward the kitchen with a quick smile, the kind that's all teeth and no warmth. I stayed near the kitchen doorway because I'm stubborn and because some part of me wasn't ready to leave yet. I told myself I was just making sure the photos got where they were supposed to go. My flaw told me the truth, which was that I needed to see what happened next. Tyler Grayson was one of Claire's colleagues, the kind of man who wears his confidence like a necktie, always slightly too tight. He was looking at the framed photos on the wall with the exaggerated appreciation of someone who wants to seem sensitive. "You're really lucky," Tyler said to Claire. "Most families lose touch with older generations. You don't see this kind of connection much anymore." Claire laughed softly. "Some traditions deserve retirement." She said it the way people say things they've said many times before, practiced and easy. I watched from the kitchen doorway. I kept my face still. That flaw of mine was very quiet and very alert. Later, Claire opened the photo box to show some pictures to her guests. She was telling a story about Ethan's childhood, one of those polished versions of someone else's memory that leaves out anything inconvenient or emotional. She was holding a photo of Ethan at maybe 12 years old, standing in front of our old house, and she was saying something about how different things were then, and Tyler was nodding with great interest. And then the letter slid free from between the photos and landed on the dining room table face down. Tyler picked it up first. "Oh, this looks personal." Claire reached for it quickly. "I'll just..." But Ethan had already seen the handwriting. He'd recognized it from across the table the way you recognize your own face in a mirror even when you're not expecting it. The color dropped out of his face the way color drops out of something when it's been left in the sun too long. He went pale and still, and I watched it happen. "Ethan," Tyler said, looking between them, "you okay?" "Read it," I said from the kitchen doorway. Every head turned toward me. I hadn't meant to say it out loud. That's the trouble with the flaw. Sometimes it takes the wheel before I've given it permission. But I'd said it and I wasn't going to unsay it. Claire unfolded the letter. The room was very quiet. Someone set their wine glass down. She read it aloud, slowly at first and then more quietly as she got further in. Young Ethan's voice filled the dining room through her mouth, which was its own kind of strange justice. The promises about never abandoning his father. The gratitude for the double shifts and the chicken soup and the baseball practices. The fishing trips after his mother's funeral, which I had taken him on because I didn't know what else to do, and the water was the only place either of us could breathe back then. And the last line, the one that had put me on the concrete floor of my garage the night before. When she finished, she folded the paper again very carefully. Tyler was looking at his hands. The other guests were doing that thing people do at dinner parties when they've accidentally witnessed something private, finding things to study on the ceiling and the tablecloth and anywhere but at the people involved. Ethan hadn't moved. And then something happened that I hadn't planned and couldn't have controlled if I'd tried. All of those years of quiet. All of those holidays where I drove 40 minutes each way and stayed for exactly the amount of time I was welcome and no longer. All of those invitations with conditions attached: come if you don't talk about the old neighborhood, come if you don't tell your fishing stories, come if you can pretend to be something tidier than what you are. All of it came up through my chest and out of my mouth in one long exhale. I want you to know, I said, walking slowly into the dining room, that I have never once asked for more than I was offered. I have shown up when I was called. I have stepped back when I was asked to step back. I drove 40 minutes to drop off photos tonight because my son called and said it would be helpful. But I have spent 4 years feeling like a mistake in my own family, like something to be managed, like something that smelled wrong. Claire's polished expression had finally cracked somewhere around the third sentence. Her jaw was tight. Dad, Ethan started. I'm not finished. I wasn't angry exactly. I was something worse than angry. I was honest. Noah came home tonight from a fishing trip happier than I have seen him in a year, and the first thing that happened was he was taken inside before he could finish his sentence, and I was told that he smelled like me, like that was the worst thing that could happen to a boy. Tyler quietly excused himself to find the bathroom and didn't come back. I fixed engines for 30 years to give your mother a life she deserved, I said to Ethan directly now, my voice lower. I fixed them so you could go to college. I fixed them so you had choices I never had. I am not ashamed of the oil under my fingernails, and I will not let my grandson be taught to be ashamed of it either. Noah was standing halfway down the stairs. I hadn't known he was there. He was in his pajamas, holding the banister with both hands, watching all of us with wide, serious eyes. And I understood in that moment, with a weight that landed somewhere behind my sternum, that I had done the thing I'd been trying to avoid. I had made this about myself in front of a child who loved everyone in the room. My flaw, my long dark memory, and my buried resentment finally surfacing at exactly the wrong time in exactly the right way. The revenge had worked. The letter had been found. The words had been spoken. But the cost of it was standing on the stairs in his pajamas looking at the adults in his life fall apart, and that was something I had not accounted for. I said goodnight and I drove home alone again, but this time the cooler was empty. For 6 days nobody called. I went about my routines. Black coffee at dawn, polishing the old reels, talking to my wife in the garage. I told her what had happened, and I told her I wasn't sure anymore if I'd done the right thing or just the satisfying thing, and those two things aren't always the same. She didn't answer, which she never did, but the act of saying it out loud helped me sort out what I actually thought versus what I wanted to think. On the 7th morning, a Saturday, I heard footsteps on my porch at 9 o'clock. I opened the door and Noah was standing there holding a cheap plastic fishing rod I'd never seen before. It had a cartoon fish on the handle. He must have used his allowance. Hey, Grandpa. Hey, Bud. Dad and Mom are fighting a lot, he said, very matter-of-fact, the way kids are matter-of-fact about painful things because nobody has taught them yet to dress those things up. But I still want to learn how to cast better. I looked at him for a long moment. Part of me, the stubborn, proud part, wanted to say something careful about waiting until his parents sorted things out. Part of me wanted to make a point about consequences. That's the flaw operating again, using a 9-year-old as a prop in a story that was never his story to begin with. Let me get my boots, I said. We drove to the lake in comfortable quiet. Noah asked me questions about everything we passed: a rusted water tower, a field of cows, a roadside stand selling pumpkins, the kind of questions that only children think to ask because they haven't yet decided what's worth noticing. I answered all of them. By the time we got to the water, I felt something loosening in my chest that had been wound tight for a week. We set up near the same spot where we'd been the week before. I showed him again how to cast, the motion coming from the wrist and not the whole arm, the way you feel for the right moment to release. He was getting better. He had my patience, which surprised me because I hadn't known yet whether any of that had passed down through Ethan's generation or gotten lost somewhere along the way. We fished for about an hour and a half before I heard footsteps in the gravel behind us. Ethan stood at the edge of the bank with his hands in his pockets and the look of a man who has been rehearsing something in the car and forgotten it all the moment he arrived. He was wearing jeans and an old jacket, not his work clothes, which told me he hadn't come here as someone with a plan. He'd come here as himself. Hey, Bud, he said to Noah, nice cast. I'm getting better, Noah said, focused on the water. Ethan walked over slowly and stood beside me. We watched the line for a moment. Then he said, I became exactly what I promised I'd never be. I kept working on a tangle near the reel. You did, I said. He exhaled, okay, I deserved that. It wasn't a punishment, it was just true. He sat down on the cooler which creaked under him. He was quiet for another minute. A bird moved through the trees overhead and Noah tracked it with his eyes and then went back to watching the water. Claire grew up poor, Ethan said finally. I mean really poor, the kind where other kids notice and say things. She spent her whole childhood feeling like she was one bad day away from being embarrassed by everything she had. So she built this whole world for herself where everything is controlled and curated and nothing can come in and make her feel that way again. He stopped. I knew that about her. I knew it when I married her. And instead of helping her deal with it in a healthy way, I just kept giving things up so she wouldn't feel threatened. Old habits, old places, old people. He looked at me sideways. Old people who happened to be my father. How long? I asked. What? How long have you been giving things up? He thought about it seriously, which I appreciated. 8 years, maybe more, small things at first. Don't invite your father to that work event. Don't bring up the old neighborhood at dinner with her colleagues. Then bigger things. Maybe Noah doesn't need to spend as much time at your place. Maybe the fishing trips are too much. He shook his head slowly. Every time I gave something up, it got easier to give the next thing up. Until I was standing in your doorway asking you to respect her wishes when she told you that you smelled old. You didn't just ask me to respect her wishes, I said. You didn't look at me when you said it. That landed the way I'd known it would. Ethan pressed his mouth together and nodded. Dad, I am sorry, not because of what happened at the dinner, not because of the letter, because of all the years before the letter, because of all the times I chose the easier version of being your son. I kept untangling the line. My hands were steady. The flaw in me had wanted this moment for a long time, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something more complicated, like something that required more of me than I'd budgeted for. I appreciate that, I said. I need some time to decide what to do with it. That's fair. We fished in silence for a while. Noah caught a small perch and released it with tremendous ceremony. Ethan helped him unhook it gently and I watched them together, my son's big careful hands and my grandson's small serious ones, and felt something shift in a direction I couldn't quite name. About 20 minutes later I heard gravel again. We both turned. Claire came down the bank path in jeans and sneakers and no makeup, which was the first time I had seen her without makeup. Her eyes were swollen and her jaw was tight with the effort of not letting it get any worse. She looked like someone who had been crying in a car for a while before deciding to get out of the car. She walked up to us and stopped. She looked at Ethan and then at me and then at Noah and then back at me. I owe you an apology, she said. Her voice was careful, still controlled, but the control was costing her something now. All right, I said. I should not have said what I said about how you smelled. That was cruel and I knew it when I said it. I waited, that part was true, but it wasn't the whole apology and we both knew it. And I should not have banned Noah from spending time with you. You are his grandfather and you clearly love him and he clearly loves you and I used him as, she stopped. I used him as a way to control what I was afraid of, and that was wrong. What were you afraid of? I asked. She looked at me for a moment like the question surprised her. That he would come home knowing things about struggle and limitation and hard work and I would feel, she stopped again. I spent my whole childhood being ashamed of not having enough. I watched my parents work jobs that exhausted them and never got them anywhere. And I decided when I was about 12 years old that I was going to build something different. Something that would never look like what I'd grown up in, she exhaled slowly. And then Noah would come home from your house smelling like motor oil and fish and talking about fixing old engines and I would feel this panic, like the old world was reaching in and pulling him back to something small. My world wasn't small, I said quietly, it was real. I know that now. The people in it weren't limitations, they were just people. I know that. Noah isn't being damaged by knowing me, he's being completed. Claire pressed her lips together hard and looked away toward the water. I know that, she said again, but her voice had gone rough at the edges. Noah had been watching all of this very carefully. He'd reeled in his line and was holding his fishing rod with both hands and looking at his mother with those wide brown eyes. Mom, he said. She looked at him. I like smelling like Grandpa, he said simply. It smells like outside. The thing that had been holding Claire's composure in place let go all at once. She put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders came forward. She didn't make a lot of noise the way some people cry. She just kind of folded for a moment while the thing she'd been holding for a long time came out. Ethan put his arm around her. I looked away toward the water to give them a moment. After a while, Claire straightened up and wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked embarrassed in a different way than she usually did, not the polished embarrassment of someone whose image is threatened, the raw embarrassment of a person who has seen themselves clearly and doesn't quite like the view. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," she said to me. "I know I haven't given you reasons to, I'm just asking if we can start somewhere." I thought about the letter I'd slipped into the photo box. I thought about young Ethan's handwriting and the concrete floor of my garage and the untouched sandwiches in the cooler. I thought about my flaw, that long, careful memory that holds things for years and sometimes holds them too hard. I thought about Noah on the stairs in his pajamas watching the adults in his life fall apart, which had been my fault as much as anyone's. "We can start somewhere," I said. Things did not heal the way they do in movies, all at once in a rush of feeling that erases what came before. Ethan started seeing a therapist in the weeks that followed, which he told me about in a phone call that I could tell cost him something to make. He said the therapist was helping him figure out the difference between keeping the peace and disappearing, which apparently are two different things that he'd been confusing for a long time. Claire was awkward around me for months. There were dinners where she was over-careful and over-polite in a way that was its own kind of exhausting, but I understood it. She was learning how to be around me without the armor she'd been wearing for years, and that takes time. We were not friends, we might never be friends, but we were something, and something was a start. Some of the wounds stayed visible. There were moments when I'd say something at the table and see Ethan's old reflex kick in, that slight tensing, that checking of Claire's expression before he let himself react to mine. He caught himself doing it and hated it, which meant he was paying attention in a way he hadn't been before. Claire sometimes defaulted to her polished version of things and then stopped herself with the look of someone editing a sentence mid-thought. Progress is rarely graceful. It's mostly just people trying to be better than they were yesterday and not always succeeding. But Noah kept fishing. Every other Saturday we went to the lake, and sometimes Ethan came and sometimes he didn't. And once in a while Claire came and sat on the bank with her shoes off and watched with an expression I couldn't fully read, but that seemed to be somewhere between peaceful and working something out. Noah got better at casting. He learned how to read the water, where the shadow falls and why fish gather there, the patience of watching without expecting. He asked good questions and listened to the answers and then asked follow-up questions, which is the best thing a person can do with knowledge. He started spending Saturday nights at my house sometimes, sleeping in the room I'd made up for him with the old quilt that had been in the family since before his father was born. We'd stay up too late watching old movies and I'd make him breakfast in the morning, eggs and toast and orange juice, nothing fancy, and he'd eat it with the same total commitment he brought to everything. One winter evening I went out to the garage to put away some gear from our last trip. The tackle box was back in its spot on the shelf. I reached up to adjust it and something slipped out from underneath the lid and floated down to the floor. A piece of notebook paper, the wide-ruled kind they use in elementary school. The handwriting was big and round and earnest, the way handwriting is when the hand is still small. "Dear Grandpa, when I grow up I don't want you to feel alone either. I think about that sometimes. I think you feel alone more than you say. I am going to make sure my kids know who you are before it's too late. I love you, Noah." I sat down on the concrete floor. The garage light buzzed overhead. The gardening gloves hung on the hook by the door, the ones I still hadn't moved because I couldn't make myself do it. The smell of oil and old metal and something that might have been sawdust, the smell of the life I'd built with my hands across many decades, filled the air around me. I stayed there for a long time, not because my legs had given out this time, but because I wanted to. Some moments deserve to be sat with. Some things that have been a long time coming are worth taking a breath for when they finally arrive. My flaw, that dark long memory, held this moment too. I knew it would hold it carefully, the way it held the other things, the untouched sandwiches, the letter on the concrete floor, the boy on the stairs in his pajamas. But this time what it was holding was not a wound. It was something that had grown in the space the wound left behind, small and unlikely and entirely real, the way things sometimes grow in winter when you're not watching. I folded Noah's letter very carefully and put it inside my shirt pocket, close to where I carry things that matter. Then I got up off the floor, turned off the garage light, and went inside to make 2 cups of hot chocolate, because Noah was asleep in the other room and he'd want some in the morning, and some things you do simply because a boy is going to wake up and the world should be warm when he does.